Great. Thank you all. Just before I start, just for a small group, can we just do names and what you understand about what a digital portfolio is? Just whatever comes to mind.
Daniel Tyndall here in the Phys Department, Physical Education, and my understanding when I was in the States was our collection of work to indicate development of initial teacher educators, or just future teachers.
Cool, thank you. Okay.
My name is Itxaso. I'm a visitor PhD student from Spain. And what I understand about that is, well, I've never used any of that thing, but maybe something useful to collect students' insights. Or
Cool, thank you, good.
Yeah, I'm Bridget Moody.
Yeah.
I'm from Physical Education in the Health Department, and I've never used digital portfolio work before, but I understand that it is the place where students can upload material that will enable them to demonstrate their development through their work, but also for staff to be able to access it so that there's
Cool.
some kind of interaction.
Interaction between, good.
I'm Joe Phelan. I'm in the School of Education, mainly technology education, and from what I've seen of e-portfolios in our area anyways, kind of it affords a unique way for students to present their work for videos and voice files and stuff like that.
Good, so the rich media that starts to come in, cool.
So a tool to be used for the students to interact between each other and also with the teacher, providing evidence or images or videos that
Cool.
we are using to create data.
So like this rich media, we've got the repository idea, the
Yeah.
certification idea, been demonstrating, starting a network.
Claire Walsh from the PE department here, and never used digital portfolio before, but my understanding would be like somewhere that students can collect evidence of the work they've done over the 4 years.
So like a learning process, good.
Yeah.
Dylan, the PhD student here. My understanding is similar to all the rest. I'm here to learn.
Nice.
Well, there is still there's a fourth one here we haven't quite covered, but it's coming, right? I'm interested in hearing.
Missy Parker from Physical Department, Physical Education, Teacher Education. And like Daniel, I have been involved with them
In the
for
US.
probably in the
Yeah.
US for probably about 20 years now.
Right.
In terms of not only gathering evidence, but providing a platform over time where students can actually reflect on their own growth,
Right,
not
right.
just to document someone else.
So developmental
Yeah,
self-awareness, a meta process,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In professional learning, cool.
I'm Ori McCormick. I'm a lecturer in the School of Ed, and I was going to say reflection as well, but this was the idea of a scrapbook. It's a
Yeah.
phrase that Missy
Yeah.
uses.
Yeah.
Of students.
And it's really interesting as you're talking, and what I'm going to do is walk through over 12 years, because when I did this, it was first 10, and I went back, oh no, it's actually 12. And then I thought I'd put trying as a sort of metaphor. Trying to do it, but also very trying, because when you try to change anything in a program, if you want to know about a program, try to change it. This is also a story of resistance that comes up, but I've become aware of the fact that we are in a system, and I'm very much immersed in complexity thinking as a process, or complexity theory around my own learning process. It's changing. Because I look back and go, wow, we have changed a lot as an institution, but it's still very frustrating. Right? Because one of the big things, and when, like you said, rich media, is faculty don't encourage students necessarily to use rich media to represent their learning, because faculty isn't necessarily comfortable with rich media because they never used it. That's a big barrier. But once faculty start playing around with this stuff, oh, this is actually a good way of learning, then it starts to shift. But it takes time for your colleagues, I realise now, to use anything other than the classic paper that they did when they went through the university program. So that's part of our representation learning, and this really just pushes to say, how do we represent our learning in a way that maybe causes change, in that we overcome the issues around theory-practice gap, because when you put a video in, like I saw today happening out in the school and in the track and field, and the students are on their iPhones looking at that, there's a very different learning process than what happened 10 years ago when we just talked about the cues, or a task card with some sort of figure doing it. It's a real interaction. So there's a different shift. So that's the notion of what it does. It changes the way in which we understand our learning. So what I'm going to do today is play around with multiple different pieces of software, so I'll try and do here, and if possible get you interacting with it, but it's a bit slow. But I'll show you the idea if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you'll be really impressed. Okay, so what is digital portfolio? We've just done that in a way, but I'll add to your definition a little bit more to say how all of those start to interact with each other, and that it shouldn't end here. The critical part is we're educating students how to use this type of platform for the rest of their professional careers. Because right now, I can link to people all over the world doing really good practices in phys ed, if I know how to find them. And if I teach my students how to find them, what happens? They curate that knowledge. And so instead of being in these lovely books here, and I open a few of those, and I noticed that no one else had opened them in their life because they have that real fresh smell. That probably no one's opened this for a long time. It doesn't sit here. It actually gets found, right? The information here suddenly starts to come out because you find it online very quickly. So that stuff, this way of communicating is still needed, but we need to have a better way of allowing the practitioner to access it as needed through the type of interface that a portfolio can offer. So the other thing this gets at is how people learn. Right? And I'm fascinated by how people learn. I've got to tell you, if you ask me too many things, there's links there, I'll send off to whole sorts of theories around learning, but learning in a context is what drives my understanding of learning. And it's very much what triggers me to know I need to know something. I then find it and then apply it, and then it changes that world, and then I need to know something else, because that world is not stuck. It's always changing based on my interaction. So that shifts my notion of knowing from in here to the interaction between me and the environment. And the best way of capturing that is through a rich media interface that then allows me to do a meta process on what did happen there, what triggered my awareness. So the other part that will come out is why people want to learn. I've asked a few questions here. University students, grades, oh, doing it because I'm going to get graded. That's not because they're going to be a teacher, that's because they're a student trying to get a high mark. So why people learn has to start driving our assessment process. So the digital portfolio starts to shift, because when students start doing something because they want to represent it, to share it with others, they're now thinking like a professional. When they're doing it to get a high mark and don't really care about it after the mark, they're thinking like a student. The two things could be the same, but the mark always makes it go a different direction. If the audience is going to be the professional out in the field, suddenly I actually change that piece of work that you gave me a mark on in order to share it with someone else, and it keeps growing. I learn because I take your feedback and I improve it. Because your feedback is about helping me communicate it to the field, not for the mark. That shifts the whole notion of how we do assessment. And then what is purposeful professional learning? And then it shifts, because professional learning, instead of just being about my own ability to teach, the purposefulness becomes about how I improve everybody's ability to teach based on what I realise works really well in my classroom with my kids, and I can represent it and share it with others. Suddenly, knowledge is circulating continuously. That is my digital portfolio. The notion of something that is almost like a global phys ed brain around how we understand effective practices within local contexts that can transfer. So when you put those things together, whoops, you get this sort of, these are the 4 questions I thought I'd try to answer today for you. Now ideally, if you had your own computers going, now you'd link here, but you can come back to this later. And what I've done is, you write it down, let's go back to the beginning here, because I should emphasize this. I put it, you find it here, if you want to find anything today. You find it here, which is the one that works on mobile devices, or you find it here, that works on your computer. I tested this morning and I had to redo another one because I couldn't make it work in Limerick on my mobile device. Don't know why Limerick and mobile device, but right? So everything is on one of those 3 places. Okay? So, what I'm going to start you off with is, if you'd link to there we go. So, 10 years of doing it, what we're going to look at is a little progression that will, hopefully, yes. I'm going to go through why, condition, research experience, and then why of the conditions. So I'm going to map it out, and by the end, you're going to see a whole map of my presentation on one page. So rather than a series of slides, I don't think that way anymore. I think in interactions, networks, connections. So, to start us off with, down here, the professional learning route. So we know about our teacher knowledge, and the key is about how to network that knowledge as we learn it here in our classes, amongst our students, then students with students, and the field, and then it grows. So the idea that teacher knowledge is always being linked up. So as they come here, the goal here is to teach them how to connect to that knowledge whenever they need to, because it's available to them, but how to access it and how to develop it becomes critical. Professional learning, be purposeful, and there's basically 4 major types that you've mostly covered when you spoke, but I'm just going to show you them clearly. Make sure I click that. Ooh. Click there. Types. Should present itself. He says, and it didn't. There it is. Good. Okay. So the 4 types that you actually talked about. Showcasing, which is often good and bad. Why do I say good and bad? What's bad about showcasing EP? Could be bad bits, but what are you about when you showcase? Are you honest?
Showing off the best.
Yeah, sure, off the best, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you may not know, but you try to pretend, right? And the problem with showcase, and this is my first experience, is students, if no one's going to look at showcase, they're not going to do it. And if someone's going to look at it, then they just do it for the person who's going to look at it. So showcase is an aspect of portfolio, like, you know, an artist, but you're showcasing stuff that you want to represent to a particular audience or a global audience. So that's one aspect. Accreditation. A lot of the US one would critique the notion of accreditation because students end up just doing it to meet that. It's not really them, they're just going to pass the test or pass the accreditation thing. It's a good idea because it communicates the structure of the field, but again, in a student mindset, they just want to fit. They're not actually learning it, they're just doing it to overcome that hurdle. So these 2 things can be problematic. The learning one is the ideal, the repository, the putting together. But to do that, you've got to have a reason for doing that, right? And that has to become part of the learning process, of the meta-analysis of what's happened. And when you're doing that, you realize that actually showcasing your best stuff maybe isn't always the best thing, because teachers, when they go for an interview, always get asked the question, when did you fail and what did you learn? If you can start representing that, then you're articulating yourself as a professional. But it takes time for students to realize that's really what a showcase is about, not just your best, but the learning journey to get at something that allowed you to learn. And then the network portfolio becomes, how do I represent things for people to understand? But by doing that, funny enough, you create this sort of showcase of who you are. I can go online and, you know, I can see Vicky Goodyear, and I know exactly what she's doing because she's got a nice vlog and she's doing stuff on models-based education. And basically, I'd probably hire her if I wanted to, because I can see exactly what she can do. And she just kept developing that over time. So that becomes a notion of a portfolio, is your representation of yourself. So these 4 portfolios are actually intertwined with each other, but in a program you start to try the learning one that has a reference to accreditation, but is about learning. And at times you can showcase yourself based on what you need to do to move on in your career, but you're always networking to share with your profession. And then these 2 often start to overlap because unwittingly you might be showcasing yourself just by what you're sharing with the public. So that's a notion of the emerging digital portfolio in the literature, but also when you start playing with it, it makes sense. This one is what I now focus my attention on for my students. How do you start to network yourself with the knowledge you're gaining in the program? So they start thinking about the audience. My wife is a language arts professor. She taught me who's the audience whenever I wrote papers, and as I wrote papers for people, my papers got better. The same thing with anyone becoming a student, becoming a teacher, who's your audience? The kids are going to teach, the parents they're going to be concerned with, the profession beyond that. As they start to shift in that one, that's what makes them into professional, the ability to communicate the message for that different audience. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
So, the notion of our portfolio, go back to the one here. See that? That was risky, it came off. So now I'm going to look at our learning experience. So going back over time, I thought, okay, where did I come from? So 2006, why in 2006 did we start doing digital portfolios? Reason being, we were integrating our classes, some of us, not all the program, like you were doing at school this morning, going out to schools, working with kids, so pedagogical content knowledge in a context, very rich. Students were learning so much, then going back to university and doing a multi-choice test on situated learning. And part of it was, this was the only thing that was valued, this they really liked, but there was this basically two areas, two lives going on. So the idea was, how can we get this to infuse what was going on at the university? So we could start saying, this is what situated learning looks like, not a multi-choice on situated learning. So the idea was trying to bring it into a value system into the university. That's why we started. So back in 2006, we were fortunate enough to get a grant, which was handy because when you get a grant, and especially the grants in Canada, I don't know about the ones here, this could be a bit risky. Oh yeah, here we go. That one. You can actually put in a grant for one thing. When you get the money, you can do it for something else, but no one seems to check. As long as you publish things related to what you're doing, which was good, because suddenly I realized making a digital portfolio cost a lot of money. So we had $105,000 and ended up $55,000 of it went into making software that was digital portfolio, even though we were doing something that was integrated in the school with a focus, with a little tiny bit of money about collecting it. We thought it would be easy. It's not easy. So as we started to develop it, it actually became a major project that at the same time, and this will be the politics of it, as we were doing it, present it over here. I almost pulled it off. So as we started to do it, it actually became politics in the institution at BC. Was the BC College of Teachers suddenly decided that every program had to be audited based on its new standards. So imagine we're doing this grant on situating our education in the school and trying to find ways of students to value it in the university using a portfolio. Then we had to actually have everybody in the program basically having a digital portfolio so that the college could audit them. So all that happened at the same time. So my wife at the time, who was my teaching research partner, became the associate dean, and so basically we started creating our own piece of technology. We created our own digital portfolio. It was bloody awesome at that time. When I look at it now, it's like really clunky. But when we did it, it was cutting edge. And we did it across the whole program. We worked really hard and we're trying to figure out what's the pedagogy of integrating this technology, collecting the repository, linking it up for accreditation, allowing students to start showcasing what they did. No idea about networking at that point. We were just trying to help them develop their sense of being a teacher. And to some degree, it really worked well. Because as we formalized it, what we got was really engaged sort of learning, and as you can see here, they're sort of in the school working with the kids, students were actually reflecting on these experiences, very rich. We thought it was brilliant, but my colleagues didn't in the program because it felt imposed. We thought we were solving a problem. We could be audited. Every student you could call up. We had evidence of any student you liked. You could actually come in, here's the standards. As you started looking through it, we had this sort of resistance, but the support staff were awesome. They thought it was amazing. So the techie guy, the guy in the library, everybody started buying in, but faculty members, reticent. Right? So you thought you'd encourage people to shift people attitudes, so you started saying, okay, but look at the diversity information that kids start to develop. They start producing these sort of grids. And we thought we'd be really clever here. So you have, here's the standards, here's the courses, you create a grid, you're analysing it, you get a systematic analysis of everything, and these students are putting in evidence in each of these based on their learning in the course. But can you see what this starts to do? What do you notice in this grid that we thought was really good? From point of view of seeing where all the learning that students value is coming from. It's nice where the icons are, but what's the problem?
There's a lot of blank
Gaps,
spaces.
right? So if you're an instructor, and here's the students, they put their stuff in, see, it was all nicely labelled, and we've got, it's very, institutionally, it was like, we could find anything, right? Because we were thinking about feasibility. You come to see us, we can show you anybody. We can show you exactly what evidence they put in, basing on your standards. But faculty weren't too keen on this, because when you look at this evidence, you start saying, okay, students are putting it in, they're addressing the standards, but ooh, look, where's the stuff where all the class is going in? It's more the volunteer work, and as you start listing courses that had nothing in them, you can start asking, well, what do students value in that course then? Well, because you're doing lots of tests and multi-choice, there's no evidence they can put in the portfolio. Okay, so we made an excuse for that. But when faculty saw that, there wasn't a lot of buy-in. So it worked really good. Here's to give you a sense. See, I loved it, because look at phys ed. It's doing really well over here. But basically other classes weren't doing so well. So as soon as the college wasn't auditing, it got shut down. I went on sabbatical, came back, wasn't there anymore. So you do all that work for 4 years, and as soon as that outside power thing disappears, there wasn't the same buy-in that students were showing. And the thing is, this is the type of stuff they were putting in, what really was embedded. The picture, and they would reflect on their first experience in the school. You'd get this sort of notion that they were learning how to become a teacher. You could really feel that narrative emerging. They were creating stories of their experience making great lessons. And I'm just giving examples from phys ed because I've got permission from the parents to show these. But they were doing it across the whole curriculum, but not in every subject area. So I had this, but obviously the grid experience didn't necessarily communicate well. But we also communicated with outside. We had interviews with our students as they left the program. And as you can see, they started to sort of buy in to this as a way of getting to students seeing that they were being valued outside. And here was from a superintendent responding to have he done an interview with our students. So we started networking the knowledge. And what I noticed in this, and we started to notice, is people from the field loved coming in and being the wise guru, being the audience as students would explain themselves. And I had times where they would, at their final practicum, they would tell such incredibly powerful stories that there was one where a kid had this disability where he couldn't recognize emotions. So this was like a 7-year-old in a class, couldn't recognize emotions. And so the student had made this game with faces on. And everybody played this game in their class, but she made it for this one particular student. At the end of the practicum, because this game became the key game, he wrote her letter saying how he'd helped him recognize what a smile looked like. And we were like, right? But you have this sort of stories that came from people coming back, doing the exit interview before they left, and we were doing it as a preparation for them to go to get that job. But it all went away. So that was the first phase of doing it. But because we knew it was a good idea, this sort of emergent decentralized control of the program, we thought we had to do it again. So the good thing is, because the other grant, even though we didn't do exactly what we said, we wrote publications, we got more money 2 years later, but for 5 years. So the 5-year one, we did it differently. And this time my wife, who's my research partner, wasn't the associate dean either, so we had to do it from the ground up. So basically now we have a course-by-course notion with digital portfolio. So this is actually interesting shift in how we look at doing the portfolio. So I'm going to give you, put this one off, a look at what that looks like now. So within the course, it's pretty, and it's over here. Yeah, there we go. Oh, it's catchy. Looking good. Yes. Okay, so here's the context. All courses are graded, but you're trying to get students to do digital portfolios, but if you tell everybody to do a digital portfolio, what will happen? Exactly. So we invented a new way of doing assessment. We said the acceptable mark at UVic is a B+, right? So if you're on an alignment scale, B+. So we took away an assignment and said you've got to do all these assignments, so normally that would be like 3 or maybe a reflective 1 and 3 written type ones, to this level, B+. And if you do that, you get a B+ in the course. Now if you want to get an A- or A or A+, you put in an extension assignment, which means you put in a proposal based on the concepts of the class, and you put that in order to get your high mark. First time we did it, there was like rebellion in some of the classes, but as we started doing it, students realized that they had control over their grade. And as an adult educator, I now was thinking I'm an adult educator, if I give you choice, you might have 5 courses in a term. Some courses you're just going to get what you need to pass, other courses you're going to extend yourself. It's a healthy way of existing. Students started really liking it because come to the last 2 weeks of term, I've got nothing else to do in your class. Now, as long as I did something in the class that was fun and festive, like at the end, they still attended. Right? So I had sports ed, I had like pickleball tournaments and dance festivals, so they all were still participating, but no more assignments. Those who put in extensions could do what they liked, but a lot of people did digital portfolios, because basically I show a structure of how to collect your evidence from the class or from the program in relation to concepts in the course, and use digital portfolios. So that became the way of doing the portfolio by those who chose to do it. Now by doing that, they started generating exemplary digital portfolios. So that's the beginning. So we shifted, and so with that in mind, you started seeing how students who chose to do it started to represent their knowledge and how they started to recognize how they learned that knowledge. So that became our goal. So this is sort of a way I theorized it. You've got a landscape professional in the field practices, so out there that we're just being out of school. And at the university, you've got this paradigmatic thinking. This is still taken from Joan Bruner's talking about how we theorize. And we take that and it's knowledge for practice. But we separate it from the field. That's our classic way of doing it. So our traditional way, and then we test you on how you understand this knowledge, this traditional knowledge. It says, should come up. Text. That should have been a definition of traditional knowledge. So knowledge that you learn in the program. And why did you come up? But things that are in your textbook and you test it to go out. So that's the basic knowledge that we always have. There we go. Structure, located, discipline, the content methods, the way we try to say this is the things that we assess that teachers know. Now with that in mind, and we represented test, essay, and group projects, we then tried to think about how we connect to that field with the landscape of our practice at the university and how we try and bring the intersection between those. So that knowledge for practice with the knowledge in practice, like I saw today. And my critique today when I was out in the school, when I was asked, so what do you see? Well, it's really good, but, and we were talking about this, they needed a prompt at certain times to see when to stop and show a kid, to see when to ask a question, to see when to actually give a focus that allow the students to create a better sequence because they've got clear criteria. Those things, they weren't doing because they're beginning teachers. But then there's sort of classic knowledge where they take it here and it starts to intersect with what's going on out there with kids, applying what they're learning here to the field, but then adjusting the script they had to actually respond to what they see in front of them. The most difficult skill of all, becoming a real teacher. So that was the thing that when you get that sort of narrative thinking that allows you to describe the practice, knowledge of practice, in practice, you get this sort of notion of, now is it going to appear this time? Text. Yeah. That personal professional knowledge, the intersection of your experience with that professional knowledge, and we talk about pedagogical content knowledge, personal practical knowledge, there's lots of classifications of that out in the literature, and how you start pulling that together is not just out there on a practicum, but you realise that you've been doing it in your soccer coaching, you've been doing it in your other parts of your life because you start to articulate it. And the more you start to articulate it, either at the experience that's happening in your program, or prior to coming, because now you understand it, it starts to be owned by you. That's the knowledge that a digital portfolio allows, because I'm not valuing their personal. I'm valuing their ability to connect it together and acknowledging it in the narrative or the evidence they put in the portfolio. That's the shift. And you can't put a grade on it, but you can allow students to recognize that this represents something that means they're going to be different when they do their practice, because they understand it differently. That is how we then do it for this type of interview. Here's an interviewer talking to a student, and this is where she starts talking about how she noticed the difference as she went through her portfolio, what she started realizing she was taking from classes. And you can see a teacher now is starting to look at how she learns differently because of what the portfolio allowed her to do. So as she's talking her through it, she's unpacking, this is her portfolio, and you can see sort of the learning, the theory she's put in here, then she's putting in her readings, then she's got her key quotes, and she's starting to say this is how she starts to put it together. So here's a page that she's used to represent one of the standards, but at the same time, she's integrating it with her own personal experience, all combined in one page. But then she's sharing with an interviewer about what this shows about her own learning. That type of discourse starts to shift their understanding, and you can see all the experience out in the field starts to be items like you talked about before, the rich media, all start to get blended together. And she's doing it not for a grade, but because this is representing who she is as a teacher. And this particular student was using that to get a summer job teaching a summer program. She just showed this and immediately got hired because she integrated everything together. So she then used it as a showcase as well. So that sort of notion of shifting your understanding of what is being valued, and this is again, there's another PE teacher, but he was also really interested in combining it with, he made a theory, he's a math teacher, about how you teach phys ed. So he started combining his math way of representing the world with his phys ed way of representing the world to synthesize it together to represent how he's going to be a teacher. So that next thing starts to say you shift that from that sort of narrative knowledge to knowledge of practice. So what is it that affects your ability to do what you do? And this sort of gets students starting to combine these things together, but also become more like we are, in the sense that we start to look at the system that affects our ability to do these things. So, ePortfolio, we found that students started to recognize how the environment they were working in was affecting their ability to learn that narrative knowledge, that combine that professional knowledge together. Their entries started to reflect that type of thinking. So here's another phys ed student who actually did a really good extension of the portfolio about gamification, but also combining sports ed and TGFU as a hybrid. Just as the literature was starting to write about it, she was already representing it herself. And she did it, it went around 4 or 5 schools to market phys ed. This became a huge project that she did starting in my class. But she started saying, we even say it's a personal learning experience. It really forces you to define and be concise about what you believe in. Stand up as an individual. This is what I believe in and why. So this became her vehicle to represent herself, combining her learning across multiple learning experiences in the program. And then the other one is, as you combine all these things together, you get like Evan's spoke about here. He could see this, and he actually now is working in a school that has the folio system. And it's a private school, but they're starting to do exactly what he says here. And he's part of the team that's doing it, of making it so it's like a Facebook representation of your professional learning. And gradually the software we're using is starting to look more like Facebook interaction. Because Facebook does it as a commodity, make it really good. And we're trying to use, and Folios is an open source software that does it to help students learn. But it's open source, so it takes slower to emerge. But this is the type of interface that's starting to happen. And Evan was already thinking about 4 years ago, he was always starting to imagine how this could affect education system. So, the key thing just to take away a message on this one is here's an example of a student. This is sort of, you can see the richness of their portfolio as they start to combine their learning across the course. And there's me, the instructor. This is her representation of what she learned in my class. Guess what feedback I'm now getting in relation to what she's taken from the learning experience? Because a very different ending to the course. So this is a sort of exit part that students that decided to do the extension, they end up doing this to represent how they've learned in the course. Is that good so far?
You rate her considering.
Say again?
Do you have provide her with a final grade, or it is?
Mine is just the final thing is the interview, and she has to submit this to me for me to pass her to have the interview. But the interview is her explaining why she put things in, and she comes to it, and often they dress well because it's like a practice. They see it as a practice of them articulating their ability to do what they're going to do. So it's that sort of space. Remember, Vygotsky talks about the anticipation of your learning. This is exactly that, because what was happening is she puts it together is one level, and part of it is, this is like 4 years ago, But as you get now, the ones that I'll start showing you that we're now doing, the aesthetics get even more refined. They actually spend hours creating nice backgrounds and colours. It's like the colouring in the crayon book at elementary school. It becomes the same thing, and then they want to put their material inside. Their sort of their precious stuff is going inside their precious portfolio that represents their identity as a teacher. So it's a very different notion than a grade. This particular student, she got the award in the program. She said, I didn't care about the mark in your class, right? Because I was representing my learning in a way that made me feel I was going to be a better teacher. But she also was also telling me how she struggled, because she's very good at getting high marks, but it wasn't always for the purpose of becoming a better teacher, right? So what is it that I'm doing it for was always a conflict in her head. Cool, I'm just going to move back now. Hi, Mary.
Hello, I'm sorry for being late.
It's okay, we're recording it. Well, we were, but you're recording your head now, I'm afraid.
That won't be pretty.
I don't know, the head looks pretty good.
Strong voice.
Alright, so, before I move on, any questions so far? I'm just going to move on to the next part.
Tim?
Yes.
Just really quickly, the students who chose to do this as an extension,
Yeah.
and so the others that didn't, part of the class again, this is part of the class, I guess, can you talk to me again how you?
Yeah.
So the
So the ones
chose
that,
not to do it, anything happened to them, I guess, or they're just happy with the grade they got, they didn't?
yeah, I mean, this was, so I'm going back now, let's say, so 2014, 2015. That's how I started. So the grant was 2013 and the process was doing the extensions. Later on, I got all students doing it. But and this is when Antonio was asking me, I said, don't mandate it. Start it small. So I'm telling you the way in which, when we redid it, when we weren't forced to do it, this is the better way of doing it. Because what happens is the extension assignments become exemplars. So then each year you can show those to students coming in. So then what happens, you get 3 or 4 first year, then you get 6 or 7, then you get 8 or 9, and then you get 13. And by the end of like 4 years of doing that, you've got half the class choosing to do an e-portfolio. Now the ones that don't choose to do it, haven't got one. Now I've realised, that's good, they're not ready. Forcing them to do it is like, you're going to have the technophobic, why am I doing this, minimalistic, and they're not really able to reflect yet. Now, in an ideal world, I'd say you're not ready to move on yet either. Because the ones that are doing it, it's so obvious that they're ready. But in a system, as long as you get a grade that passes, they carry on. And that's part of our, you must have the same struggles, right? How do you give students honourable ways of moving away from the profession when they're committed to a degree, while still ending up with a degree that maybe not allow them to certify to teach in schools? We need to have other ways of being good at teaching when you're not necessarily good at K-12 teaching. So, but a lot of those students end up being fine in a 4-year degree. But this was the way in which I sidestepped that. So there is definitely a readiness to do this type of work. And when you've got that, the exemplars help the next year understand the readiness looks like.
And then did it eventually become a grade? I missed that, or it's still not a?
No, no grade.
They just want to extend just because?
Extend, yeah. Everything I've done with digital portfolios isn't graded, it has to pass.
Yeah.
And because I have exemplars, the level of pass is high. Right? And if you're not able to do it, you then redo it until you are. So once you've got that established, then the bar's here. We're not accepting C++. We're all in the equivalent to an A thinking process, so I don't need to put an A on it. Right? And I think that's part of one of the things that when I finish this little bit, I've got you a broader understanding of digital assessment and assessment for learning and what that really means. And a bit like Anne was writing, I just read the paper that Dylan gave me. I mean, how do you actually start separating the diagnostic evaluative notion of assessment, the summative and formative, and actually make them so that they do the purpose? What we tend to do is we collapse everything into one for simplicity, but then what happens is the evaluative cancels out everything else. What number? I mean, Antonio just said it. If I put the number on it and give them feedback, they just look at the number, right? But the feedback, when I do feedback on portfolios, they change them. The lovely thing about the software we have is it emails me when they make a change. So I give you feedback. When you change it, it tells me you made a change. I can go and go, well done. I can do an emoji like that, and they're like, oh yeah, brilliant. So the assessment becomes quicker. but my feedback is actually responded to and appreciated. Therefore, I put more effort into it, because I'm not trying to put your feedback to say, you got 79, you got 64, you got 82. Now, when he marks the same papers, you got 76, you got 84, you got 72. Right? Now, we don't do that, but I can guarantee that's what would happen, because we're not that consistent. We can maybe, within levels of 4 levels, we can all be consistent. 5 levels, but once you start getting to 10, 12, 13, there will be like 2 or 3 differences between people, because we just value different things. That's who we are as human beings. That's why we mark APA, because we can say it's concrete. That's not marking their concepts. Right, that's the type of thing that we do. Is that fair comment? All right, so what we're going to do right now, digital portfolios at UVic, and the interesting thing now, and I think I'm going to just show you, so when you get to the link on this, you can go on yourselves, and you see these little links. This will give you an overview of how we're doing it right now, just like your Prezi. This gives you a summary of the digital portfolio SHIRK that we've done, the findings, insights, and then this one gives you the research project we're going to do next. So this is what's coming up. So I'm going to skip this one, because I want to get on to the big meaty one, but this is there for you to have a look at how we're moving right now. Is that good? Okay. So the next one is one of our conditions. Now, this is where we talked about at the beginning what was the portfolio. This bit in green, this is where I'm starting to think about the idea of a portfolio is to create this interaction in our programs as students are learning. Because what we notice, as soon as we do the exit interviews and you have people from the field come to university to do interviews with students, just 20 minutes in pairs, talking through the portfolio, you share the bio of the person who's a superintendent or a visiting prof or a teacher down the road with the students who want to become teachers. That ups the standard. This person could be the superintendent who's hiring you in 2 years' time. The person coming from the field loves coming in because they're seeing these rich, insightful portfolios that tells them what's going on in your program, but also tells you what the students are learning and how they're learning, and often connects to things they're trying to do in the schools anyway. The conversations are incredibly powerful. That interaction shifts the notion of what is valued at the university, because the interview becomes the focus of their learning rather than the grade. So that's where we started to really shift our efforts. We prepare people for that, and we have people coming in from the field, and we integrate them together. That's the process that seems to shift us into a different language of learning that's more connected to the field, because it's embodied by the people that come to do the interviews. So in this little outline, I'm just going to walk you through what that looks like. So come on. There we go. So what I'll do is I extract it from a larger presentation, but just focusing in on the interview part of what goes on. I think it's going to catch up in a minute. It says hoping it's going to, there we go. Right, so this is sort of a, if you can see it's the background of a computer lab. And so the setup is in pairs around a computer screen. So that's a sort of 2 students, 1 person from the field, and having that conversation about their portfolio. So in that process, there is a sort of context, the insights that we develop. And so I'm just going to give you a sense of what that is. The question, which is our focus, we're looking at the portfolio, how instructors start to learn from doing this. So the interaction that you talked about, where if you can see someone's digital portfolio before you teach them, how does that affect you planning the course? The pedagogical practice around doing a portfolio, the sort of students learning that happens, and then how this could affect program renewal. Now right now we've done this pretty well, we haven't really done this part yet because we've done it from the ground up rather than being imposed on. But our curriculum has just changed in BC. And the curriculum in BC now has become a competency-based curriculum. We have no final exams. The goal in 2 years' time, there'll be no high-stake tests. driving universities insane. There's 2 exams. There's going to be the literacy and literacy exam that you can take at any time in high school. Everything else will be a summative, which is so classically, you don't have teachers marking here, but everything will be a summative one done by teachers in the local school. And those marks could be used along with a portfolio and these 2 in numeracy and literacy. That's the plan, and it's just starting to roll out. So that's a shift. And BC does really well in the PSAC measure things, and they're following Finland, because Finland's doing the same thing. I happened to just be in Singapore this summer, who also do really well in the PSAC thing, but they pretend to do one thing and do exactly the opposite. It's totally command style. But they have a lot of study groups, a lot of spaces between classes. So the reason why they do well is not because of the pedagogy in the classroom, the shifting of that process. So with that in mind, the reason why we're doing it, and we actually did this program with nursing and social work, which was really interesting because they were doing digital portfolio as well. We were looking at how this would shift. Now the thing is, we were trying to address this sort of disconnection, but in nursing and social work, they don't have any agenda to share outside their program. So whereas education, you can see the reason to do it because you're going to connect to the field. In those 2 professions, it was really about the learning process, the repository and learning. So theirs was all about internalizing how to learn. Whereas in education, we're about trying to affect the way in which we do assessment in the system, modeling at university and reflected out in the school. So this is sort of our publications around that. This is what our system looks like now. It's located in BC, and that's important because for FIPA reasons, you can't ask anyone to do something that's not located within the province. So we now have it totally located, so we can ask you to do it. If it's not, you're not allowed to do it, if you have information that goes outside the province. In Ireland, you have a similar FIPA legislation, but you are more lenient. You're not like, as long as you know about it, they're allowed to do it. We can't force you to do it. That's the difference. And the system basically works on this idea of you create, you share, and then you try to engage in a wider community. So it's sort of the same model that I was advocating before. The sharing gives you confidence, and then you start to make it go beyond the classroom or the university program that you're working in. That's the sort of model that the Mahara system that we use in Folios advocates. This is sort of the institutional breakdown. You see the members that each one has. And then inside that, we created this sort of process of, this is the program, elementary and secondary. And then this is the student's experience, extension assignments, collected across courses, and then using an interview at the end. So this became a model for the whole term. And in the one particular one, they had like 5 courses were combined. And those classes went out to one school or a selection of schools. And then those students created portfolios, and teachers from those schools and superintendents came and did the exit interview. So we had this sort of interaction with the field. And what's really cool about that is the superintendent who hires people in the local district was part of the interviewing team. So that all shifted sort of the interaction and the idea that now we were working in a partnership with the school. And the schools were interested because the new curriculum meant that they had to start figuring out how to do portfolios. So suddenly we're in a conversation about shifting assessment. We came up with this sort of model. So this is sort of an infographic around how you get to the stage of putting together a portfolio. And the key thing is, as we did this, we made it into a sort of gamification part. So each one had a video, and as you did it, you got badges. So basically we used it as a way of breaking down the technology skills, because students struggle to engage in technology. So make it part of sort of the more playful experience. And we did that within a sports ed model, and we had them actually scoring points. And so then I ended up, we had to make badges for making cookies and bringing vegetable dips, because that became a social building bond. And students were bringing that to class as well, as part of sort of how we pulled together to work. So this became sort of a model of how we teach how to use the technology without having to do it in a direct manner. So it became in their own time, But then, because they're in teams, they started showing each other as well. So the whole thing became the sort of interactive and the side, and so the technology just got developed by the students themselves. This is when they created their portfolio page. Here's their badges, and each badge is represented different skills that they'd done by creating their own portfolio. So actually making a portfolio became a page in the portfolio, because when I click on the badge, it will say what skill I have. Students loved that, because that actually became evidence. And what was cool about this is when you hit the badge, you remember how to do the technology thing like embedded Prezi, or how to timestamp a YouTube. So those things were actually held there as a memory item as well. And then this is sort of what the, if you clicked on the badge, what it would look like. You get a video showing you how you do it. And this is how the pages that students start to create. And you can see the aesthetics starts to become important to them. And they're breaking down their work. And they had this, she had a colour scheme. And this was a video that was her sort of statement about why she wanted to become a teacher, that she did right at the beginning of the program. So all those things start to build, and then this is sort of the interview process that starts to happen with the students at the end of the term. Good? So, just to give you a sense, test this, but see if it works. I haven't got any mic. Okay. I don't know if you can hear it.
There's a
Oh, there you go.
light bulb moment when I realized just how much of my past experience was essentially prep for teaching and how many lesson plan type things I've already done in the past that I never really thought about before until I was talking about it with someone else.
Seeing how it's changed since I've created all these pages and included all these artifacts, it's really made like my teaching philosophy into a holistic, inclusive classroom. And it was nice to show that in my pages to show evidence of why I want to.
I think I always found in school that I do a test and then I just forget about it. It's one year out the other. And I think that keeping everything, having it in one place, and doing something interview where you have to look back over it all and really see how far you've come is really important.
It's just having them, all three of our portfolios laid out sort of side by side. I think we're a really great way visually and in our discussion just to see how we had the same experiences and where they were different, and that just really helped bring together like the benefits of an interdisciplinary approach to doing whatever, or like the profundity of community and what that can do for people and what that's on.
I would say that my self-confidence really rose this year. I mean, I wasn't sure what kind of teacher I would be a teacher, but at the end of it, I'm feeling very confident that I will be a successful teacher, and I'm really passionate about doing that and bringing it to women. Really inspired from the things that I've learned this semester, and take what I've learned and put it into practice.
So the interesting thing there is those students I hadn't taught. So that was other people's students. So, but they represented the sort of common. What we did is after the exit is we capture students, and we just did a little 1 minute quick video, and that's a clip from those little 1 minute videos. But a lot of them said, going into the exit interview, I wasn't sure, and then 15 minutes later, I got it, right? Because something happened in that 15 minutes, in that conversation. There was, the aha was a common thing. I didn't realize how much I'd done this term, right? I didn't understand how I knew why I'd done what I'd done. They actually could articulate concepts. And then we asked some of the interviewers what they saw, and this is what they said, which was really interesting because if this works, I'm streaming with a very low in my work. But they're really cool things they say.
They get this view of what matters to them, how they've grown as teachers, right? And all of a sudden you're having different conversations way more in depth because you've got these artifacts, right? So it was great to hear their beliefs, what mattered to them, and for them probably even to figure that out as they look at something.
I think it's a way for a prospective employer or mentor teacher or teaching partner or whoever it may be to be able to navigate through someone's professional identity
So that whole notion, the interesting thing was that particular principal actually got the students to come in to his school to talk to the teachers about their portfolio because they were starting to develop it in the school. So then there's a sort of reciprocal after he'd been and seen what our students were doing. So sort of that interaction around a notion of learning that is digital. That schools are trying to figure out how to do it, but they also need teachers to understand a different way of doing assessment. So I'm just going to pull this down now to finish off. What I wanted you to see here is each of these you can connect to get new insights or ideas that go beyond. So these are up to you. And this particular one, on the yellow one here, this is one where I really help you, if you want to explore it, explore the idea of what digital assessment does. So it's a way of representing lots of literature and insights on that process. So just to put it all together to finish off with, I'm just going to put it here. So what I've looked at here, and I'm just going to give you this little clip here to answer the question at the beginning. This is sort of how I use that idea of extension assignment, using these three principles. So these actually link to our first, in Canada we have TRC, which is the sort of Truth and Reconciliation Council, which is acknowledging how we've taken away the Indigenous lands. So we're actively trying to infuse Indigenous culture into our courses. And so I actually took a course with Dr. Lauren Williams, who's like the CRC chair for language revitalization, and she gave me permission to use these three words from the Lillywat culture. So Kwethkweb means put the learning of your peers before your own. Emakala means create what will benefit 7 generations to come. And then Axikil means find one's own passion and use it to energize the community. I use these then to organize my digital portfolio, because these became perfect ways of justifying why you did it, and it's based on a 4,000-year-old culture. So that link was actually really useful to sort of say about why we now run the class in a different way. And the funny thing is, I then put these parallels here from complexity theory. These are the same principles that Indigenous cultures advocate as creating ecosystems that are sustainable and live for their community. So I thought this is a lovely parallel between Indigenous culture and new digital technologies that facilitate this interaction that's a different way of understanding how we learn. So that's the idea of that networked portfolio. So possibly digital could be in a post-digital age. The idea is that we can reconnect to the experience in a way that allows us to overcome the problems of industrial age, where we've sort of separated the two. Thank you.
Thank you. We are conscious of time, but I think we have some time for some questions or comments for Tim.
It's a lot to process.
Oh yeah.
Thinking. Can I ask you a very practical question? Are your students postgraduate students? Or?
There's a mixture now.
Right.
And the nice thing is, because through the extension assignment process, we've infused it into all the programs. So elementary B.Ed, we have a 4-year B.Ed. We have after degree 16-month elementary and secondary. And we have currently a 5-year B.Ed, but it's been suspended and been replaced by a PDP route. But in all those programs, they're all doing, excellently, all doing a digital portfolio, but through the choice mechanism. So it's not a program-wide thing. We had that, it doesn't work. Well, it did work, but it didn't work for everybody and got shut down. However, it did create the imagination for it. Now the new one is coming through this process that really is infusing through the courses, but it's actually asking faculty to take it up. But the potential is so great, because actually I can now click on my old students and I can find their portfolios and see what they've been doing. And I'd love to teach them again, because I actually could teach through them now, rather than trying to be the expert. I would be drawing from the group, because they have this rich evidence of their experience that basically becomes part of my resource to be a teacher. So it would shift the way in which we could then teach in a program. But it's getting more faculty to understand that we don't just keep repeating courses that we teach in the first year. By the time students get to the second or third term, the nature of courses should be so different. But in our program, students are complaining that they're doing unit planning here, and they're still doing unit planning here, and it hasn't moved substantially forward. They're not going, they're still doing the technical. They haven't gone deeper, because every teacher teaches like they've got the students for the first time. How to make that happen, I think, is what makes teacher education programs develop. It's the coherence between, that we're communicating between classes in natural ways. And if you can just go onto a portfolio and just come across your students and click and see, get an idea, click, see, get an idea, then teach them, you're going to teach differently.
So again, my apologies, I've been interviewing all morning, so this may have been covered. So I get it that the portfolio is an extension. It's an enrichment activity, if you like. Is there the intent, is there the aspiration that in fact you will move to having the portfolio as the demonstration of their learning?
In my world, yes.
Okay.
Within the politics of an institution, with my faculty, not under present leadership.
Okay, okay.
But I'm playing a political game, so I'm putting another grant to help the local schools develop digital portfolios, because as schools do it, university has to reflect what the schools are asking. So if that next grant comes off, then I see that moving my program in that direction, because we'd start paralleling what schools are trying to do. University students need to all be doing it, not just those that have chosen to do it, or those in some aspects of the program but not other aspects. So right now it's not a coherent programmatic commitment.
Okay, I've got two, if I may, Chair, two questions.
Thanks.
So two questions then. One is, if I understand you correctly, that the numeracy and literacy is going to be still the summative assessment that they have to go in schools, but the rest of their work will be portfolio-based, evaluated by the teacher?
It will be portfolio evidence, and the teacher will still put a grade.
Will still put a grade.
But the summative grade, and if you, in the research literature, unless you have a very substantial, well, it doesn't work anyway, but how you get every teacher to be summatively grading in a similar way. If you go down to 4 levels, yes, you know, approaching, exceeding, we can do that. But if you start trying to put a number on it, 98 compared to 76, it doesn't work as an accuracy.
So I can imagine then as university admissions trying to deal with this, how do I, you know, there's 100,000 students want to come into university and we have 60 places. Now how do I, other than a lottery, so I guess that becomes quite challenging.
And the question, and I have a colleague, John Unwin, who actually is the superintendent of Ministry of Education, who's dealing with that. Only 30% of the population goes to post-secondary. So part of the argument, why does 30% of the population control what 70% are doing? So what seems to be the pattern the university is doing now is they're going to take all the grades that you've done from grade 10, 11 or 12, and then will accept evidence in a program of study that will also be considered, but they haven't decided what that is. And then based on that, there'll be GPA plus something else. So like, for instance, business school at the University of Victoria now has gone 60-40, 60 on grades and 40 on other evidence that they're using for admissions to their program, which is very competitive to get into. Medicine is doing the same thing, because in medicine the problem was every student has an A. So they're like, we've got lots of A's and we get like 8.1 compared to 8.7, and really we want to get rid of the 8.1, so they're asking for the additional, to actually interview an additional, to do the filtering process. It's going to mean more of that engagement, and part of what has been advocated is students are more likely to stay in programs where it isn't just based on GPA, that there is an element of commitment that is being advocated beyond the mark they get. So if universities believe that, then they're going to put more money on the admissions side, on the basis that students will come in, will do a program in the allotted time more effectively than students that come and they disappear and they lose their cohort value by the end, because everything is financially based on this cohort going way through. But if you only got 2/3 of the cohort by the end and you're still putting that through, you're losing lots of money, right? So that's sort of where the justification is by, at this end, making sure we get the students that are going to survive our programs.
Yeah, we've got an example in Ireland. We've got a very rigid system to get into university, but we do have an experiment in Trinity where they have actually got a portfolio, but the part of the issue which comes to my last question is around time. And they only have a little boutique program, but if you want to get into our Chemi Business School, you're going to have to, look at evidence of 1,000 students to make a decision. So this comes to my last question. Let's assume that your aspiration comes through and you're in a position to totally use a portfolio as the basis for your decisions about their learning and so on. In terms of cost of time.
We're talking about coming into program or in the
No,
program?
I'm talking about you as the evaluator.
All right, coming in the program.
We have people who will do multiple choice questions.
Yeah.
We'll have people who do essays. We have people who do multiple coursework. We have people who do projects, and then we have the e-portfolio. Now, your e-portfolio is helping them to develop it, to support them, and then to do the interview at the end. So that's all time intensive. So I'm just trying to get a feel of what is the implications for you as a faculty member in terms of the costs to you for that approach to assessment.
So for me as an instructor who's done it, because of the nature of a portfolio, that is, the groundwork is at the beginning, helping students know how to reflect on, as in ground their work in, what did you do to set this up, what's the context, how would an audience understand it, how do you how do you learn to use the technology to do it. So I've done all that. I've taught EdTech and I've taught a phys ed class, and I've combined the two, the same cohort. Because I do the exit interviews where I have people coming in, and it's actually across the whole program, I don't have to do any more work other than organising that. And because I've set it up with clear criteria, and I know that all the students have passed, I have to pass them before they get through. This part is the real feedback part.
Okay.
And what's interesting is, and I did this at the end, is I video record the screen capture and show them how to upload the screen capture, have a page, it's a summative page, and they wrote a reflection at the end after the interview. And those reflections were just like you heard them talking about how they learnt in that moment. I read a little comment on that because I was interested. Maybe took me 32 students, an hour and a half, and I loved it. It wasn't like putting a number. So the type of assessment I was doing was finalising the learning for me and getting a snapshot of what, and actually what happened is I fast through with a screen capture and hear a bit and, oh, that was cool, and then write a comment. But it was actually celebratory in nature. So the workload for me was no more than what I would have done if I was doing a final exam. But the final exam was always depressing. When people got 56% because they basically hadn't slept all night because they had 3-5 exams at the same time. What am I assessing here? What am I measuring? I'm measuring the capacity to write an exam with no sleep. So I mean, that happened to me about 8 years ago, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. So it's a way of, we got to acknowledge how learning happens through assessment, rather than just trying to rank. That's the goal. But I understand the administrative part. It's a good barrier, but we can get past it, Mary.
I had another question, but this one just popped in my head. Did you have any students that at the end of it go, you shouldn't be a teacher? They went through the extension, they went through the portfolio, and at the end it was like...
Yep, I had 2 drop out in, and one said, when I looked at what my peers had done, I realised I wasn't cut out for this. But she moved into, and she transferred into a BA in English literature, and she was way happier. But it was interesting because the nature of, especially when you go and do the school experience and you've got the permission to put the video up and the image and the writing about that afterwards, I think that triggered her to realise that she wasn't that interested in going through the video and analysing it in order to improve. So it's...
Has it been the other way though, where she kind of discovered that, where you assessed it and you discovered it? Said, there
was one student I had 2 years ago who 1 a.m. on the day before the interview I refused to pass it, and if I didn't pass him he wouldn't be able to go on his practicum. And he worked until 4 a.m. in the morning and did the interview, and just scraped through. But I basically said, you know, that's it. You've had the lead up, and you haven't met any deadline, and I really don't think you should go into school right now. So he did get through, and he got through. Well, I haven't seen him in the fourth year. He got through the third year.
Was it mostly deadlines, or was it like the quality of the reflection? Of the
His
work
quality
also
was borderline, yeah. I mean, I made him redo it 3 times. So that was basically, he thought he could just get through, but I wasn't going to accept it. But, you know, that's the only one I've had out of probably 150 students in the last 3 years. Where there was one that, the other ones decided themselves. Perhaps like 3 didn't get through. And it doesn't always indicate. I've had students do really good portfolios and then go on practicum and withdraw. So we can't say this is like nails them into the career path.
Is it one practicum they have?
No, this was we have a 3. This particular program had a 3, a 5, and an 8. So this was on a 3. 3-week practicum. This person withdrew, but I don't know about you, but often I find it's personal issues that get in the way, rather than their ability to teach the class of kids. So there's so many complex things that surround becoming a professional.
Final question, do we need any money to start using digital portfolio here in?
Do we need what?
Any money?
No. I've actually set you up an institute
Okay.
for you to
So
use.
we don't need it because you have created an account for me,
Yeah.
but officially.
Yeah, I mean, this will give you a chance to play. At the cost, I have 1,500 people on a portfolio system, of which 800 are active. So 15 are the ones that have graduated and I'm using. And it costs me, the research grant, $3,000 a year to maintain that. I have one developer. And he's really good, but it's just a security. Once the system's up, it's an open source, so it gets renewed twice a year, gets upgraded. He basically is protecting the security of it, and it doesn't break because it's software, right? But the only time it breaks is when new innovations and browsers come in, and they have to adjust that software to work in the browser. That's sort of the work level. But otherwise, it's maintaining the security is what I'm paying him for and keeping it going, and basically speed, right? So he makes sure we have the server that can handle the numbers. So that's what we have right now, and he's extending that. So like I told you, he's got 3 nodes now in Asia and Amsterdam, so that he's spreading that portfolio system that he supports. But the reason why I got the research grant is so I can keep paying him to maintain it, because for £3,000 I'm like, okay, we can keep this going, because it offers now for me a different way of doing assessment. That I just for phys ed it's like a dream, because suddenly there's so much more. And if you look at their portfolios, the art, music and PE are all over them. Language arts, it's difficult to find some math, but socials, depending on the instructor, but those subjects are just so easily represented for their dynamic richness.
This is to put a damper on it.
No, Mary.
Yeah. Sorry. So it would be incredulous to you, but to teachers in BC. The fundamental success of the program that the schools are doing is dependent on the teachers doing assessment.
Yeah.
The unions refuse to allow teachers to do that here.
Strange phenomenon, right?
They're very articulate ideologically about why. So we can talk about it from a union perspective of terms and conditions and more work for teachers, but they actually don't believe.
So they don't believe in the summative assessment part? But
They do believe in summative assessment, absolutely.
No, they don't believe they should do it.
They don't believe that they should be doing it.
So the definition of summative assessment is that someone external to the institution does it?
We have, there's 2 things that happen when we have a state examinations commission that designs the tests.
Right.
There's obviously national curricula that they follow, and then we have teachers who are paid in the summer, who are trained incredibly carefully, with regard to validity and reliability and scoring. And
But
they do it, but they do it anonymously.
Math, science,
All.
English.
All.
But you don't do PE though, yeah? Assess PE. Don't.
We will, starting 2 years from now. Every subject, 49 of them, are all done that way. And the Reform Act, the reform from the National Curriculum Council has been attempting to move away from summative assessment. We have 2 national exams, one at 16 and one at 19. And, absolutely, totally resisted by both parents and by teachers. So it's a challenge. Now we have I'm sure Antonio has told you about classroom-based assessment and the new efforts there, but it's quite interesting to listen to parents' understandings of what the role of the teacher is, and to listen to the local teacher who said, I can't give Johnny a C or whatever your 4 levels would be or whatever, because I'd be in the school, this is being a bit dramatic, but they are that way. I'll be in the shop and they'll be saying, how could you possibly give Johnny that score? So there's all kinds of iterations around it.
So, but they are doing, because I read the article, peer assessment, self-assessment, and
the Francis Murphy and Anne McPhail paper.
Yeah. So that's going as a normal practice in schools.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, so this just fits straight into that.
No, sorry, what fits straight into that?
Portfolio. That's basically the key methods of assessment in a portfolio.
Yes, that's what's being resisted.
The peer and self-assessment guided by the teacher.
Yeah.
It's then basically the way that people work through that is you create these, and then for accreditation purposes you submit, which would be, so if you're doing the Phys Ed one and you're going to do your example of a skill development, and if you're doing your project,
you'll send it off.
And then you just submit that, right? So that's the external part, but the whole process of creating that is the formative self and peer.
Yeah, there is the component where you interview the student, or you have the externals interview the student. The student does have an opportunity to reflect on their assessment, and that becomes part of their assessment.
Yeah, and that would be like a nice little screen capture here, and that could be submitted with the final thing. So I think you could still make it work. It's just making the formative have a summative flavour to it, and then the summative external is a submission that comes out of that, right? Which teachers are all then creating. And the notion of how we do assessment has to shift into the 21st century, that we can't be relying on the written form, and it has to be rich media. So basically, the pages you're submitting are like the page I've got here, it's just in a secure system. And part of what your government will have to do is what is going to be the system of submission, right? Because it can't be a PowerPoint, right? It's got to be a cloud-based system that everybody can use.
We were discussing yesterday about the Living PE portfolio assessment.
Yeah. And the split even started to 20%, the physical activity project on PowerPoint. And Tim has come up with PowerPoint.
PowerPoint is that, so 1990s.
Lara, it was, that's getting external, has to be on the same base. Government only going to PowerPoint.
Well, I just do Google Slide, right? And if I have to, but now I just do Google Slide, because stable doesn't crash and I can do anything like with it. I mean, if you're a PowerPoint, you know you can crash it any time on your own machine if you're not careful. Yeah, so it's a damper, but I think it has to move that way, Mary, because...
I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I'm just saying that it's a particular challenge.
I think it's just helping the teachers and unions be more explicit about what they understand as good assessment for learning, which is what we're advocating, rather than of learning is part of that, but then it just aspect is going as evidence to substantiate the ongoing formative. Basically what you're looking at.
Would the ongoing formative line up with what they would deem to be valuable in summative? I mean, like, so I teach teachers in DCG, so design, communication, graphics, all the CAD stuff, and as part of that they have to do a 40% portfolio with 2 CAD models and all that kind of stuff, and they have to make their portfolio. It's meant to be richer than what it was in terms of them designing, but still there's output 1, output 2, output 3, Now, they can approach those in different ways, but there's explicit marks going
Right,
for
they're
the way.
accrediting on certain things. that
Yeah,
they do.
so it still is essentially obviously summative. You're not capturing exactly what they do during it, just capturing
Yeah,
how well they can align to what's being asked. So is the full value of the e-portfolio being got out of that?
I think two answers that would be, one is the accreditation is meeting those, right? Whatever that means, you get certified, you pass that module, right? But then the reflecting on the process of how they learn to do that is the portfolio, is the formative,
Yeah,
is the competencies that goes across the curriculum
yeah,
that you're articulating and learning how to learn, which is the actual meta process of a portfolio, is continuously you being aware of the processes that you need to have to adapt to the 21st century,
yeah.
right? Thanks, Mary. And that's part of what should be advocated, is a shift in how we prepare people to be members of society. With, like, you've got the exact same we had, 14 career, 16 career. How do you prepare people who aren't necessarily, I mean, even, I don't know about if you look at your past, I realise I've had 8 careers to become a prof. I wasn't just a teacher, became a prof, and there was so many in-between things and junctions in my life that, oh yeah, I did have 8 careers before I became a university prof. But we don't always think in that terms, right? We have this sort of school job, which isn't the reality, right? It's school opportunities for career paths, depending on where you want to live and how you want to live. And then you get re-qualified to do something else. But it's the processes that you're taking that transfers you from one to the next, not necessarily the content. That's most important in the institution, may not be the most important content in the field, but how you learn that content is your ability to develop it further in the field. Is that good?
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very good.
That's,
Well, everything's there.